everybody, welcome to the Neil's Homestead. I'm Jeanette and today we're going to be in the kitchen. As time goes by, especially in the winter time when I don't have fresh produce to eat, we eat quite a few home canned jars of things, and so I tend to collect jars on my counter. And instead of hunting up a box and putting them in there and then go putting them in a storage place, I like to just figure out something to put back into the jars and put them back on my shelf. Today what we're going to make is split pea soup in a jar. Here's a quick look at what we're going to use. We're going to use dried split peas that I bought at my local Amish bulk food store. And then I'm going to use dried celery that I dehydrated myself actually several years ago, and I think it's time to try to get it used up, along with dried carrots, and that is the same way that I dehydrated myself. I am going to use this Amish store bought dehydrated onions, and then for some spices I'm going to use some allspice and bay leaves. I'm going to use garlic, and then we'll use some pepper, which I don't have on the table, and some salt. Before I put these jars on my counter, I always wash them in the dishwasher, but some of them have been sitting here for a little while, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and wash them in the dishwasher again. And by the time I'm ready for them, they'll be all clean and probably even hot still. Along with the dried split peas that I already showed you, I'm also going to be using a ham bone to season it. And I put it in this big pot of water and have been boiling it for several hours. So I'm going to take the bone part out, and then I'm going to pick all the meat off of it and add it to the split peas whenever it's time. After I've got all the bones and meat fished out of my pot, then what I have to do is measure this out. For every pound of split peas, I need 2 quarts of liquid. I cooked it in this, what I think is maybe a 2-gallon pot, but that's not going to be big enough. I drug out my taller stainless steel pot that I'll be doing it in. The only thing I don't like about this pot is that it's thin on the bottom, and I have to be really careful, even on my glass stove, that I don't let it get too hot because it'll scorch down in there. So this is what I have to choose from, unless I want to make smaller batches in that pot, and that's not really what I want to do. I want to make at least 7 quarts, but I think that I'll end up with more than that with my 5 pounds of beans. So what I'm going to do right now is measure out the liquid, the broth from my ham bone cooking, and I'm going to do it with a 2-quart saucepan. I'm going to be having 5 quarts in here, but for my 5 pounds of split peas I need 10 quarts minimum of water, and that won't account for any water or moisture that needs to be soaked up by the dehydrated vegetables that I'm going to be putting in there. But for now I'm going to do 10 quarts of water and 5 pounds of split peas. That's 2 quarts of water for every pound of split peas. With this, I'm adding 5 more quarts of water to my pot. Since my pot has a thin bottom, what I'm going to do is bring my pot of liquid to a boil, and then I'll add my peas. So I've got the burner on high, and I'll let that sit there for however long it takes to come to a boil. As soon as my broth has come to a boil, I'm ready to put my peas in there. That'll cool it down pretty quick. And then I'll kick it back pretty low so it can sit there and continue to simmer for about an hour. I didn't add any salt to it at this point. There's probably quite a bit of salt in there from the ham bone, but I haven't tasted it. Later on I will taste it and see how much salt I need to add. Well, the hour's up, so I'm checking to see what it looks like. It looks like the peas are pretty mushed up, but what I'm going to do is take some of them, just not much, but a little bit, and put them in a bowl and see how soft they are. That's kind of hot. Oh, they're very soft. They just mash right down. So the split peas are fully cooked at this point. For the next step, you have two choices. You can leave it kind of chunky where the peas are still left unmashed, or you can puree it so that it's all creamy and smooth. I might mash the peas a little bit, but I'm not going to stick a blender in there or anything and puree the stuff, so I'm just going to leave them to do whatever they do. For our split pea soup, I want what I put in the jar to be fairly thick, because when I dump that into a pan to heat it up, I also want to add a can of evaporated milk. And so that's obviously going to thin it down some. Right now I still have quite a bit of broth in here that is probably not going to absorb into the peas themselves much more. And just by doing this, I'm tearing the peas up. Now, since the rest of my ingredients are dehydrated, they're going to soak up most of that broth that's in there. That's the carrots. This is the celery. I'm going to add about the same amount of dehydrated onions. For the garlic, I'm just going to dump some in. I'm not going to measure it. I just remembered that I do need to taste this, so I'm going to dip out a little bit of the juice and let that cool so I can decide how much salt I need to add. For this much soup, I'm probably going to add about 10 bay leaves, because I really like the flavor of bay leaves, and I think you probably can't hardly put too much in there. For the allspice, it only calls for 1/4 teaspoon per pound of peas that you put in, so I'm going to put a little bit more than a teaspoon and measure it like that. I'm going to put about the same amount of pepper in there as I did the allspice, maybe a little bit more. Well, I need to taste this to see how much salt. That's not very salty at all. I'm kind of surprised. I expected a little more salt. Well, the recipe just says salt and pepper to taste, so that's very vague, isn't it? What I'm actually going to do is take a little gravy ladle, and put in that much salt, and then I'll taste it and see how it tastes. I'll stir it around real good and get the salt dissolved and see if it needs much more. Now, old guy, he salts everything, no matter whether I've added salt to it or not. I have a kind of a fear of over salting things, so I tend to undersalt things usually. He won't think that's enough salt still, so I'm going to add another pretty good amount of salt. It would be a disaster if I oversalted this too much. I've got my salt and everything added. I still need to cut up this ham that I took out of here that's cooked off of the bones and add that. After I get that put in there and let it cook, I need to let it cook for around another 30 to 40 minutes. And all of the dehydrated things should be absorbed and, start the cooking process. It still has to cook a long time after I put it in the jars and the canning process. So it's not that they won't be done, it's just whether they're absorbed enough to know how to get it ladled up into the jars in an even way. During this step, I've had to keep it stirred up fairly often because it keeps wanting to stick on the bottom. And I know it's because this is a thinner pan and it's just down closer to the heat source. But it's lunchtime. The jars aren't quite finished washing, and we're going to eat some of this for lunch today. Now, as I said, I normally like to put milk in this, but I'm just going to eat it the way it is for lunch today. Well, as our custom is on noontime meals, we sit in front of the TV and catch up on some news. And so I brought old guy his split pea soup. We're gonna see, I want to see what he thinks about the salt level. He's been out working in wood, bringing some more wood up to our house.
Well, the first bite, I think it has sufficient salt.
Well, that's kind of unusual for my cooking, isn't it?
It is. You're getting better every day.
Well, yeah, good luck with that. Well, the soup is done. The jars are finished washing, and I've got my canner out with 2 inches of water put in the bottom, and I'm ready to get the soup put into the jars. I have a nice big ladle here that helps me, so I'm ready to get that put across over here. Now you're supposed to leave 1 inch of head space. Well, I got the 7 jars full, and I still have what I might guess is a couple of quarts left over. I'm not going to process those because I don't want to run my canner just for 2 quarts, and I don't have anything else I really want to do right now. The next step is to clean up any mess I made on the top of the jars. I was kind of messy even though I used my little funnel. It seemed like that stuff is not the neatest stuff to deal with. After I've got it all cleaned off the top, then I'll just take my jar lids. I had them in warm water. You don't have to put them in hot water. And I will lay each one. It's kind of some water trapped in between. Next, you need to screw the ring on and get the jars over in the pot. We need the burner on high to get it to start cooking. It's time to put the lid on where this arrow is lined up with that notch. All these little notches are lined up so that I can put the bolts up and tighten the nuts down evenly all the way around. When it starts boiling enough that you have steam coming out of there, you need to set a timer for 10 minutes. This is called venting. When the 10 minutes is up, then you take the weight and find the tin on there and flip it right down over it. I like to turn the burner back up to high again because it'll build the pressure up in there faster. We need to wait until this gets up to 10 pounds, which will cause this to start jiggling, and then I'll turn the burner way back down just to enough pressure in there that it will jiggle this about every 15 seconds. After it gets to 10 pounds, then I need to set the timer for an hour and a half, 90 minutes. That's how long it takes for it to process. Time's up on there. It's got the heat off. We're going to let it gradually cool down. Since I only have 1 canner's full of product to do, I'm going to let it just cool down slowly. If I have a lot of canners full, like in the middle of the summer and I'm doing green beans or something, then I have to be a little more impatient about letting it cool down. I get it off the stove, and you know, I don't want to force it to cool down because you end up losing product if you force it, because you'll have jars that might break or not seal. So that's why if I'm not doing any more, I'm just going to let it sit there and cool down very slowly, and I won't open it up until it's all the way cool. I've got 7 jars canned of split pea soup. We ate lunch, plus I have almost 2 more quarts that I stuck in the refrigerator that we'll eat up uncanned. We'll just eat it 2 different times, maybe in the next week or so. I think it'll last safely in the refrigerator that long. So that was pretty good. I'm glad to do that, and I was so glad that old guy liked it so much. He even asked for seconds, and he hasn't been doing that much lately because he's kind of got to where he doesn't want to eat so much. So thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.